Welcome to Energize Community Impact. I'm Dean Eaton, Director of Community Impact for Chorus Connect Australia. And my special guest with me today again is J.R. Woodward. Hi, J.R. How are you?
Hey, doing all right, doing good.
Good to see you again. I'm here in Melbourne, Australia. And currently you are residing where?
In Seattle.
In Seattle. Yeah. Well, I don't always know because, I realize you have the same library follows you around the world, maybe, but you live in different places at different times, and that's a pretty appealing idea too. But that's part of being on mission and training people in mission, and I guess that's been your life for a long time, hasn't it? Traveling a bit.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Ever since I came to Christ in '86.
Yeah.
I can't believe how long it's been.
Wow. Well, look, I want to introduce you to some of our viewers today who may not be as familiar with you as other viewers. But first of all, to say in this series, our conversation has really been about church planting and about missional movements. But JR is highly experienced in this. He's been passionately planting churches on the east and west coast of the US for over 25 years. And some of the distinctives of the work that JR does in his training work and in the work he's done personally, he really values tight-knit community, life-forming discipleship, locally rooted mission, and boundary-crossing mission. He's the author of Creating a Missional Community on Creating a Missional Culture on InterVarsity Press, and he co-authored what is now a bit of a classic, The Church as Movement, in 2016 with Dan White Jr. He co-founded the Missio Alliance and currently serves as the National Director for the V3 Church Planting Movement. He is the co-founder of the Praxis Gathering and writes for numerous websites and journals. He holds a Master of Arts in Global Leadership from Fuller Theological Seminary and a PhD from the University of Manchester in the UK. Well, welcome again, JR, and today we're going to discuss communities on mission. And this is really part one. Next week will be part two, communities on mission. Now, having read a fair bit of your material, you make an assumption that all churches are by nature sent communities. So why is this important to see ourselves as a sent community? And how do we live into that destiny as churches?
Yeah, great question. Well, I would say, like being and belonging are fundamental needs that we all have as humans. And as Leonardo Boff wrote when he was speaking of the Trinity, he said, community is the deepest and most fundamental reality that exists. And so when God chose us to belong to him, he gives us a new sense of being, a new identity. And I think the reason that this is important to see ourselves as sent communities is because we belong to Christ, and he gives us our sense of being and our identity. So it might be helpful to maybe look at what it means first to be chosen by God. And maybe I'll give you a little personal example here. So I'm like left-handed typically, like I eat left-handed, I write left-handed, I surf goofy foot, which means that my left foot is in the back. And but for some reason, when I started playing baseball, t-ball, I was throwing with my right hand, and it was a little bit awkward. I was not that good, and even playing t-ball when I was at bat, like I would strike out, like I was pretty bad. And so, like, when it came to choosing teams, I usually was one of the last people that someone would choose for their team, and so that was a little bit kind of demeaning, right? Because I wasn't chosen. I was kind of left over at the end. And so especially as a small little guy, I was pretty small. But other times in my life, I remember kind of being chosen first, when I was a part of the group. And when I was chosen, man, I felt like a skip in my step, like a greater sense of value and worth and purpose. And so in the same way, like when God grabbed a hold of my life right before my senior year in college, I realized he had chosen me, and so, but what did it mean that he chose me? Some would say that like we've been chosen to be exclusive beneficiaries of God's grace and goodness. But as you know, like Leslie Newbegin makes a strong case that God has chosen us to be a bearer of God's blessings to everyone. And in the same way, like Abraham was called and God blessed him, made his name great, and through him wanted to bless all the nations. God chooses us, he blesses us, and he wants us to extend that blessing to all people everywhere. In fact, Jesus put it this way: you did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so I think what's amazing is that Jesus links our chosenness to our sentness by letting us know that we're chosen and appointed so that we might, bear fruit for his kingdom here. And probably the classic text that has a really, I feel like a theological richness to it is how the sending nature of God is wrapped up into our own sending. And so when Jesus says, as the Father sent me, so I have sent you. And the beauty of this thought that kind of falls from Jesus' lips here is that we learn not only about the nature of God and his own sentness, but our own selves and how we've been sent to the world to be a blessing to all. And so, as we talked about in an earlier session, ever since like the 1950s, the church has really developed this missional theology whereby what was separated in the Enlightenment, the church and mission, has been tied back together in our time. And so one of the fundamental rediscoveries that have been made is the whole Missio Dei, where the Father sends the Son and the Father and Son send the Spirit, and the triune God sends us. And so this theme of sentness doesn't stop with the being of God, because as Jesus lets us know, he's sending us in the same way that the Father had sent him. And so, in other words, when we reflect on the sending nature of God, we discover our own sentness. And as we reflect on the nature of the incarnation, we discover how we can live into our sentness. And so that's a little bit the importance of kind of understanding that we're a sent people, because if we're chosen, we're sent. If we're not sent, then we're probably need to re-examine whether God's chosen us or not.
It's interesting to me that one of the things that tends to happen in the preaching schedule of churches around this theme, we do have it in those who follow the church calendar, post-Pentecost tends to be a classic time for preaching on mission, and a reminder of these things. But the notion that we are sent is quite a reversal of thinking for many of us who've grown up in the church, because we grew up, a lot of us, in the church growth era where it was, we want you to come and see, right? We want you to come to us. We'll attract you in somehow, right? I don't know, free helicopter rides if you fill a pew or something, but we incentivized it, right? But this is about us going out, and that reversal of thinking about that being our identity. It does remind me of Karl Barth's summary. Karl Barth, from which all other, I think, mission statements of churches seem to derive. He talked about gathering for worship and sending with the gospel as a kind of summary statement of the purpose of the church. And it seems to me that we have often thought about gathering for worship and how we can attract people into our worship. And then, of course, we feel like we have to maybe dumb it down a bit so that we can be more attractional for those who don't understand, and on it goes. It seems to me you're talking about a different paradigm. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so, there is a need for us to kind of come together as disciples. And that we talked about that happening ideally in personal space, where you have 5 to 12 people that really are learning what it means to follow Jesus. And but like that social space of 20 to 50 is meant to be the missional space, where we really kind of dedicate that for mission and dedicate that for those who don't know yet Christ yet. And ideally, it's even done in a space that they're more comfortable with, as opposed to one that we're comfortable with.
Mm. And that I guess that points to the idea that it's not like we're trying to make our worship unattractive to people who aren't in the faith.
Yeah. No, for sure
You know,
not.
but on the other hand, yeah, that's wonderful. How does this line up in your thinking with the aspiration of many pastors who may have still have in their thinking that unless you're a large church pastor, you haven't succeeded? What is?
Yeah.
It seems to me this paradigm breaks that somehow.
Yeah, like I kind of sent you a slide. I don't know if we could put that up.
Yeah.
It's one that I kind of want to use this time and next time, and it's really my only slide. And I think this kind of speaks to the issue of kind of like all of us have to determine, all of us who kind of help to lead churches, what's the core thing that we're multiplying. And what I've been suggesting, when you think about the four spaces of belonging, the intimate, personal, social, and public space that we've talked about before, if at the core we're multiplying personal space, and that's kind of for disciples, and those disciples are building a social space that's designed for mission, everybody can be a part of that, and we can just simply multiply. It's easily replicable. And if you're going to be movemental, you have to have something that's simple enough to replicate. And like I said, even if this missional space ideally is in like a third space where it's much more comfortable for the non-Christian than us. And so this becomes like something that all of us can do. And let me just kind of explain kind of what it means to live into our sentness. If as disciples, so let's just picture you and I, we got 12 people together, and each of us kind of are praying for 5 non-Christians on a regular basis, you know, and that group may change, especially as some of them become Christians. And then let's just say each of us, all 12 of us, take a time to at least once a week have a coffee or a meal with some of these people that we're praying for, so that we have some meaningful connection. And then, so when we start like a social space, wherever it might be, and we invite people to it, there's a good chance that a number of the people that we've been praying for and connecting with will want to be a part of this. So we could host a dinner or something. One of the things that we did at UCLA, we just had this $1 dinner for students, home cooked meal. It's just a purely connecting space for my Christian friends, for the rest of us, the 12 of us, to meet some of our other non-Christian friends and really just kind of build relationships. And I think like, I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. That social space can have different dynamics to it, but like, I think one of the best dynamics is just to keep it a very much connecting space. It doesn't have to be a big spiritual thing. I remember there was this atheist that I met in LA, and he was somebody I prayed for regularly. He was a super nice guy, a deep thinker. And I would just take him to lunch occasionally, and we had really, really great discussions. He knew eventually kind of what I did, and that I was pastoring a church in LA. And sometimes he would talk about what that meant for me. And maybe like a year after we initially met, and we were having lunch, he said, "Hey, JR, I was really wanting to get involved into some kind of service project. And I figured that you and your friends probably are serving the neighborhood in some way. Is there any way I can be a part of that?" And I said, "Sure, man, it'd be great to have you come along." And so I think when we realize that as a sent people, we're kind of sent to help people find their purpose, to join God in making the world a better place, to give people a sense of belonging, to help people become more whole, to discover the goodness and beauty of God himself. That's so rewarding. And that's kind of what it's a very simple way to kind of live out our sentness.
Very good. JR, one of the other things that you talk a lot about in your literature is the idea of having a kingdom manifesto, a kingdom message, and a kingdom method. I'd love for you to unpack what those 3 things mean for us. And do we want to keep this slide up or take that down?
You can take it down.
Okay.
But we'll come back to that next time. it's just a good core element to kind of remind like the core thing that we're multiplying.
Very good.
It's probably the only thing, if we can keep that in our mind and do that, we'll probably go a long ways. But yeah, when I think about the Kingdom Manifesto, I kind of think about, obviously Jesus came to preach about the kingdom. That was his whole primary message. I think when it comes to theologians, there's a pretty strong agreement on that. And, we're called when Jesus teaches disciples to pray, what is it? What are we to pray? Part of that is, may your kingdom come, may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so I like to think about, when you see in Revelation, the New Jerusalem comes down on heaven, Jesus says he's not going to make all new things, but I'm going to make all things new. In other words, he's all about redeeming the whole world and everybody in it, and, the whole kit and caboodle. And so I think today, what it means is Kingdom Manifesto is that we just live as people of faith, hope, and love. And when I think about hope, I feel like that's something that our world is in desperate need of today. We have so many difficulties. There's the pandemic, there's rising inflation, there's increasing debt, there's cultural wars, and then just recently Putin invaded the Ukraine, and unspeakable tragedies are happening there. And when I talk about hope, I'm not talking about just positive thinking, but this like stubborn capacity, that the stubborn hope that has a capacity to be embodied in people and communities in such a way that it kind of spreads around the world. It's a hope based on the love of the Father, the faithfulness of the Son, and the power of the Holy Spirit. And so when the prophets talk about the future, they talk about, there's going to be no more poverty. There's going to be an abundance. And so the question I like to ask is, how are our economic practices at this moment anticipating the reality of the abundance and the elimination of hunger and thirst? The prophets talk about how in the future there'll be peace, where the wolf will lie down with the lamb. And Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, which is really the Kingdom Manifesto, talks about our need to love our enemies. So how should we treat our enemies at this moment, anticipating the reality of peace and justice? And so I think as we pray this kingdom prayer and we start to live it out, we become people of hope in a world desperate of hope. And so I think, living and developing this community where faith, hope, and love become the key areas that we're kind of becoming. That's what I think about with the Kingdom Manifesto. Yeah. And when it comes to I don't know, maybe we can kind of stop here if you want and chat about anything that you want.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it seems to me that the, we think about an approach that's Christocentric, when we talk about the cross and all that means for us as Christians, it's often seen as a negative symbol by people who are not in the faith. But we understand, don't we, that we see everything through the filter of the cross now, and we see that Christ has come to carry the judgment of the Father upon all sin. And so as evil manifests itself before us, as in the case of the intensity of war, as a case in point, what we see is a lot of blood being spilled. We see a lot of blood, and we either go back to the blood of Christ with that blood, or it will always cry for vengeance from the ground. It's the old problem. And
I think like what makes us what has the potential to make us different is that Jesus is not setting up this new humanity as over and against another people.
Yeah.
And too often we get our sense of belonging by being over and against another group. And what he's really doing is kind of doing away with that. And if we really belong to Christ, we're looking to be a blessing to the world, and we have to think about how to do that.
Yeah. So that's God working from the inside out on all of humanity and manifesting his life, and us being those who witness to that fact. Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love the idea of a kingdom manifesto and a kingdom message, and you touched on method a little bit there. You started to talk about how that might influence our economics and some of those things. Would you like to tease
Yeah,
that out
I
a
want
bit?
to talk a little bit about the message too, because I think
Yeah.
like too often, like there's some groups that kind of emphasize the king, and then there's others that just emphasize the kingdom, and just about like only those two things. But like the message is that we have a king and a kingdom, and it's really important that we keep those two together. The other thing I've noticed is that, you know, we have the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And so sometimes different groups will focus on one of those three, but all three of those are extremely important because they each bring a different dimension to the message that we need to kind of keep in mind. And then the other way I think about like a holistic message is everything that was lost at the fall, you know, our relationship with God, our relationship with each other, our own kind of sense of brokenness, and our relationship with creation, all of that is kind of redeemed in Christ. And so like through the cross, you know, now God is kind of working in us. There's a theological us and God, there's a sociological us and people, there's a psychological, our own wholeness, and there's the ecological. And so the message is just far wide, and it touched every part of life. And when I think about the method, is because God's purpose is to reconcile the world to himself and us to each other. What this means is like the reason why he's chosen us and sent us is because there's two elements to what he, at least these two elements. Obviously, we just talked about more. It's our own wholeness and creation too. But the fundamental two are our relation with God and each other. And so the beauty of sending us is that like we help other people connect to God as we ourselves go out. So we've been chosen to be his ambassadors because he's not only wanting to reconcile the world to himself, but us to one another. And when we go to the other and we get reconciliation and they get reconciliation with God, both of these dynamics are at work. And so I think that's why God doesn't just kind of come and appear to everybody. It's like he sent us out because the message is both a relationship with God and bringing together this one new humanity that isn't finding their sense of identity over and against another group, but finding it through belonging to Christ, as you said, who was on the cross. And the fact that he was risen again shows that his purpose on the cross was a worthy one, and it's worthy of our life as well.
That's incredible. And so how does that play out as method for us?
Yeah, so the method meaning is us. We are the method of God.
Right, right.
There's not any other method. So if we don't understand our sentness and live it out, we're not going to see things happen. And again, like he's chosen us to and sent us because he's wanting to reconcile not just the world to himself, but us to each other.
Wow. I remember my old dad used to say that the angels cringed at Pentecost because they realized that God's plan was just about the motley crew he was pouring out his spirit on. And they went, yeah, oh, man. No, is that it? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, even like part of us is like, we're not quite fully mended yet. And in our own brokenness, and as we share our own brokenness with others and are vulnerable and humble, you know, people, you know, they can, you know, they can see their own need and be honest with themselves. And I think that's a really big part of us being effective as people who are sent.
Well, yeah, and right there, you've opened up a really huge topic about humility and vulnerability and how we portray ourselves really to the world. Yeah. As opposed to come to Jesus and all your problems will be solved.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more like come to Jesus and walk with us co-wounded people, right? It's
exactly.
We're discovering we're wounded, and probably we're discovering we're a bit more wounded than we even thought we were.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's
but
right.
That's good. That's wonderful. There's so much more of this being teased out in your literature, but also in the work you do in your training work. But I just wanted to mention again, or get you to mention the fact that we're anticipating a new work from you coming up It might be as soon as a year from now or less, but
Yeah. Hopefully October, if I can meet some of my writing deadlines. But yeah, I'm working on a book. It's kind of based on my PhD research at University of Manchester, and it's called The Scandal of Leadership. I think we probably recognize we have a leadership crisis in the church. I don't think I need to mention that too much. And so the goal, the subtitle is Unmasking the Powers of Domination in the Church. And so I'm really trying to diagnose kind of the misuse of power by Christian leaders. And I think it's unfortunately, it's like too timely of a topic, but I do hope that it brings some help to that.
Yeah, we look forward to that very much. And I think that's, for many watching this, JR, that will be anticipated because the things we've been talking about today really touch on how we do leadership in the public space. And this is something that's important. And perhaps down the track, you and I could have some further conversations around that when the book gets launched. But for now, we want to thank you for talking about communities on mission. And this has been part one of that dialogue. We're going to have part two next time we talk.
All right.
I want to thank you for your time today, and to all of those listening on the podcast or those on YouTube, we want to thank you for being with us. And on behalf of Chorus Connect, Energized Community Impact Program, we thank you for being with us today. Thank you, JR.
Thanks,
Take
Dean.
care. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.